Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Today we'll be holding a meeting of the Transportation Council. Before we get started, I'll read through a checklist to ensure that the meeting that we are holding is in compliance with the right to know law. As the chair of the Transportation Council, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and in accordance with the governor's emergency order number 12, pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04, its extension, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. Please note that there is no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting, which was authorized pursuant to the governor's emergency order. In accordance with the emergency order, I am confirming that 1, we are providing public access to the meeting by telephone with additional access possible by video, and just 1 second, and other electronic means. We are utilizing Zoom for this electronic meeting. All members of the committee and selected legislative staff have the ability to communicate contemporaneously in this meeting through this platform. And the public has access to contemporaneously watch and or listen to the meeting on YouTube and via phone by following the directions and links provided on the General Court website. We have provided public notice of the necessary information for accessing the meeting in the Senate calendar. We are providing a mechanism for the public to alert the public body during the meeting if there are problems with access. If anyone has a problem, please, Alan, could you please give us the number and the email to contact?
No problem. The email to contact is remotesenate@ledge.state.nh.us, and the phone number is 603-271-3043. Again, that's 603-271-3043. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Alan. In the event the public is unable to access the meeting, will be adjourned and rescheduled. Please note that all votes taken during this meeting shall be done by roll call vote. Finally, we'll start the meeting by taking a roll call attendance. When each member states their presence, please also state where they are and if anyone else is in the room with you during this meeting, which is required under the right to know law. And we'll start with Commissioner Sheehan.
Good afternoon, Victoria Sheehan, and I am in my office in Concord, alone.
Thank you. And Director Bilecki.
Good afternoon. I am Elizabeth Bilecki, Director of the New Hampshire Division of Motor Vehicles. I am alone in my office in Concord.
Thank you. Jim Jalbert.
Good afternoon. I'm Jim Jalbert, owner of C&J Bus Lines. I am alone at my office in Portsmouth, New Hampshire.
Thank you. And Brad Nichols.
Brad Nichols, Executive Director of Coast. Home alone upstairs at the moment.
Thank you, Rad. Mike Tardif.
Good afternoon, Mike Tardif, Executive Director with Central New Hampshire Regional Planning Commission. I am alone in my office.
Thank you. And is James Fox here? Okay, I have him on my list. All right, Nate Miller.
Hi, Nate Miller, Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission. I am alone in the conference room of our office in Manchester.
Thank you, Nate. Heidi Marshall.
Heidi Marshall, Hoyle Tanner Associates. I am home in my living room and no one else is here right now.
Thank you. And Connie Crawford.
Connie Crawford, I'm home alone in my office in Baltimore, Maryland.
Wonderful. Thank you for being here. And Carol Miller.
Carol Miller, Department of Business and Economic Affairs. I'm at home alone in Gorham, New Hampshire.
Thank you, Carol. Representative Sykes.
Yes, I'm here and I'm actually downstairs alone, but my wife is upstairs with the 2 dogs.
Okay, great. And I'm Senator LeVake. I am in my home in Brookline, and I am here alone in my home office. Did I miss anyone who is part of the council? Okay, just want to make sure I got everybody. Thank you very much, and just want to welcome Mike Stanley, who will be speaking with us a little bit later about transit pilot projects. So, all right, the next we're going to review and adopt the October minutes. And do we need time to review the minutes, or have they been reviewed? Are you ready to vote, or to make any corrections first? Or do you need some time? Do we not need time? Mike, you look like you wrote them, didn't you?
Light read, isn't it?
Good stuff, really good. So I think we pretty much all read the minutes. So does anyone have any corrections to the minutes? Any changes?
Senator, I would move to adopt the minutes as presented.
Second.
Okay, and we'll take a roll call vote on the adoption of the minutes. And thank you both for those motions. Representative Sykes.
Votes yes.
Commissioner Sheehan.
Yes.
Director Bielecki.
Sorry, that was a yes.
Yes, okay, thank you. And Jim Jalbert.
Yes.
Brad Nichols.
Yes.
Mike Tardif.
Yes.
Nate Miller. Oh.
Yes.
Yes, okay. Heidi Marshall.
Yes.
Connie Crawford.
Yes.
Carol Miller.
Yes.
And Senator LeVake votes yes, and the minutes are accepted. Thank you very much. Okay, our first presentation will be delivered by Commissioner Sheehan regarding the impacts of COVID-19 on the State Highway Fund. And thank you so much, Commissioner.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm trying to share my screen. Can you all see a presentation now?
Not yet.
Or maybe now?
It's coming, yeah.
Okay. All right, well, thank you for this opportunity to continue the conversation concerning how COVID-19 has impacted every mode of transportation. At the last meeting of this body, we heard from individuals at the department. First of all, from Trish Lambert, who is our administrator for the Bureau of Aeronautics. And then Ted Kitchens talked about the impacts on the Manchester Regional Airport. And then you heard from Shelley Winters, our administrator for the Bureau of Rail and Transit, who talked about the impact on our public transit agencies in the state. And then Rad and Jim were able to provide some of their insights representing those modes on this council. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about how the Highway Division was impacted by COVID-19. But before I do that, I do want to talk a little bit about the work of the department to support the statewide effort to COVID-19. So when the governor issued his executive order and then the subsequent emergency orders, as you all are aware, the State Emergency Operations Center was activated. And we at DOT are part of the statewide response. So we're what we call Emergency Support Function 1, Transportation, as well as Public Works and Engineering. So I'm very proud of the DOT. We really stepped up and tried to support our colleagues across the different branches of government that were impacted by the pandemic. We worked alongside the National Guard in particular. So we actually hosted a call center for employment security here at the Morton Building. And that was staffed by National Guardsmen and DOT employees. We also supported with the statewide response staffing the 211 call center. And then at times we supplemented the efforts of the National Guard to support with efforts such as PPE distribution. So in addition to trying to continue our regular operations and deliver our mission, we were doing our part to try and support our colleagues across state government as well. But when COVID-19 struck, first and foremost, our primary concern was the health and safety of our employees. DOT is considered essential from an emergency management perspective. And so we were fortunate that our employees could keep working, but that also placed a burden of responsibility on all of us in leadership to make sure that we were putting in place directives and guidelines so that work could take place with as many protections as possible to keep people well during this period. And in particular, the timing was such, March came around, we had already advertised and awarded the majority of our construction contracts. And so we were working very closely with our construction contracting partners to make sure that we had guidelines and procedures, not just for our own workforce, but also to keep the industry safe. We really wanted to take advantage of some of the opportunities associated with the low traffic volumes on the highway, which I'll talk about in a moment, and accelerate as much work as possible. But we could only do that if we found ways to work safely. So the department issued a number of directives. Those directives, we did partner with AGC, Associated General Contractors, the New Hampshire chapter, to make sure that they were following similar initiatives and programs. And I have to say, the technology that we've been investing in over the last 5 to 10 years really set us up for success. We were very fortunate. We're already using things like electronic bidding. We are very used to reviewing submittals and documents electronically now. So it was much easier for us to maintain a basic level of service and keep moving, especially with the physical work in the field, because of all of the solutions that we've been investing in up until now. We did go a little bit further. For example, things like material slips that change hands out on the construction site, we were able to go contactless using some different software solutions for that. But at the end of the day, our construction inspectors, all of our material lab folks, they had to keep working because the construction industry was working, and we have to make sure that we have the oversight on a quality product at the end of the day. The other challenge on the construction side was around supply chain. While New Hampshire was continuing to advance all of its transportation related projects, neighboring states, that wasn't the case. And for example, there was a period due to the public health crisis that Vermont had to shut down even some of their fabrication and construction work. And there's one large fabricator in Vermont who was supplying materials for a number of our projects. So there was issues like that we had to work through, but it was a great collaboration with the construction industry to make sure that we kept going. And so in many respects, people didn't appreciate the impact on the department because it was a busy summer. It was a dry, hot summer. And so we got a lot of work that was already awarded and planned, completed. On the operations side of the house, it was a little bit different. Our maintenance folks, normally we do a balance of sort of routine maintenance, mowing, ditching, those types of activities. But we're also out there trying to replace pipes. Our bridge maintenance folks do both bridge washing and those kinds of activities, but also do smaller bridge replacement projects. And so given some of the financial uncertainty I'm going to talk about in a moment, we were really forced to pause and think carefully about how to best use those resources and perhaps defer some work as a way of cutting expenses for this season and trying to make sure that we were able to balance the budget at the end of the year. But on the operations side, while they were working and we were doing a lot of work through the HR and safety teams to keep them safe, it was a little bit of a different story when it came to the engineers and the admin staff. So that we could focus, to give you a sense of perspective, we have about 1,000 personnel who work in the field every day between all of the different types of maintenance work and operations work, as well as construction and our geotech teams, our materials testing teams and such. All of our engineers, they were able to work. So we took the governor's direction very seriously. When we were in the first phase, while all aspects of DOT work is considered essential, the governor issued the stay-at-home order. Immediately, we wanted to support our employees who need to be home with young children or for other reasons. And so anybody that could telework, at the governor's direction, we allowed them to do that immediately. And we really wanted to try and reduce the number of people in our building. And then even later on, when we moved into the safer at home phase, we continued with the teleworking. And we've been very fortunate. Again, the investments we've been making in technology prepared us for this. If something like COVID-19 had happened even 5 years ago, I think it would have been much more challenging for our teams to stay productive. But we have a lot of tools in our toolkit, and our colleagues at DOIT, the Department of Information Technology, has embedded people here at DOT, and they were phenomenal. The team is led by Charlie Burns, and they were very quick to help us stand up solutions where we didn't have any. For us, we've talked about, should we move some people back into the building part-time? But what's happened is most people have really just set up their work set up in their home. And so for them to work productively, we have a lot of folks who are doing things like drafting or looking at calculations. They use multiple monitors and screens to be as efficient and productive as possible. So we actually let people take some equipment home. We did an inventory, but we wanted them to have all the tools to be able to maximize productivity. And we've seen really great results. And then we've been, just like the legislature, highly leveraging tools like Zoom and Teams and WebEx to try and stay productive. And public participation was one of our primary concerns. We're a state that prides ourselves on being able to have a close working relationship with communities, with regional planning commissions, and we're advancing projects. It's really important that we get stakeholder feedback and engagement. And so we have been experimenting with virtual public involvement with tremendous results. I'll be honest, we've had significant increases in participation using some of these virtual tools. So even post-pandemic, I think we're going to be looking at hybrid models where we'll offer in-person as well as virtual opportunities to be part of the project advancement process. So those are some of the positives, but this is what we're dealing with. So we very much respect that given the public health crisis in the state, the governor did the right thing implementing at first the stay-at-home order and then trying to flex the economy open as it was safe to do so. But the result was, as you would expect, a significant reduction in travel on our state highway system. And so the graphic on the screen shows you, I know it's a little busy with all the colors, but just shows you how the traffic volumes have changed over the duration of the pandemic. The blue line is sort of the statewide average, but we have the data for pretty much every region of the state. And what we're seeing is, especially in southern New Hampshire, where we have a lot more individuals who commute to and from office jobs, there's been a greater reduction in the use of the system, whereas in rural areas, things have rebounded back to sort of closer to normal sooner. So at the height of the crisis, we had about a 50% reduction in travel across the state. On our turnpike system, it was actually a little bit higher. We dipped down to about a 55% reduction. And then, as I said, and you can see from the chart, over the spring and summer months, as we flexed open, things started to go back to normal. One of the positives coming out of the pandemic is people have rediscovered the outdoors. And so I think people took the governor's direction to hike local very seriously. And we did see an increase in travel, especially in the North Country. If you look at the portion of the graph in the months of August, you'll see that we actually saw an increase in traffic in both the North Country, that's the red line, and in the Lakes region, which is the green line, which shows that people were taking their vacations locally this year. And we certainly had a lot of visitors into the state, which is part of the reason that I think financially, the state's been in better shape than we maybe anticipated originally, with all of our revenue sources rebounding. But then, we continue to see that strong comeback in terms of traffic volumes through the late summer into the fall. But as soon as the foliage passed, we're starting to see a bigger gap again between last year's traffic volumes and this year's. So what does this all mean? Well, a reduction in traffic volume does mean a reduction in revenues. And Director Bilecki and the folks at the DMV, they're collecting vehicle registration fees and such that certainly support transportation. But the Department of Safety also collects what we call in New Hampshire the road toll, or the state gas tax. And so we have seen a reduction in revenue. This graphic is actually from an article that was published by AGC. They had been asking both DOT for information on lost turnpike revenue, as well as working with Department of Safety. But this is the data that we've published for public consumption, and that shows you the reduction in revenues through September. So I should say the Highway Fund was in a somewhat precarious spot prior to COVID-19. This body has talked about it previously, but with vehicles becoming more fuel efficient, while people continue to travel about the same amount, if not a little bit more. So we were seeing that vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, climb. Our revenues were flat or declining, despite the fact that the cost of doing business, of course, goes up year over year with regular inflation escalation. So we knew there was going to be a challenging budget ahead because of some of the structural issues with the Highway Fund. So any reduction in revenue sort of compounds those issues and challenges. And so, yes, just yesterday, both Department of Transportation and Department of Safety presented our agency efficiency budgets to the governor and the panel that's meeting as we speak to hear the presentations from the other agencies. But this is the biggest concern that we have going forward. The reduction in revenue ended up not being as significant as we had thought in the short term, because the governor was able to flex things open and the economy started to recover and people were moving sooner than we had anticipated. We didn't have as great an immediate impact. However, one of the most challenging things I think for all of us in transportation going forward will be modeling and projecting traffic volumes and growth into the future. So for example, I talked about that reduction in vehicle miles traveled associated with commuting. There are businesses in the Boston market that have decided not to open their offices again until June 30th at the earliest. And so there are many, many people telecommuting, as our own engineers and admin staff are here at DOT. And so we're trying to understand what the future is going to look like. At the moment, we're still trying to open as much of our economy as possible, but we recognize that we're still in that safer at home phase where people are limiting their travel. Offices are not fully open again. So we're trying to establish how much of that reduction in traffic is temporary versus how much is going to be lasting. Some of the same challenges that we talked about last time when we were discussing public transit in particular. So we are watching closely what's happening in other parts of the country. I will say there are some of the larger metropolitan areas where they've seen their vehicle miles traveled actually rebound to pre-COVID levels, and yet they have no AM or PM commuting congestion. And so what we're seeing in some parts of the country is that individuals who are working from home are out on their local roadway network. The flexibilities of working from home give them the opportunity to run errands, to maybe coach their kids' sports team, whereas before, when they commuted to the city and were working a more traditional day, they didn't have that same flexibility. So we're seeing already that while the previously congested commuting corridors look very different these days, there is more travel on the local roadway network. So these are things that we're going to have to monitor into the future and work very closely with our regional planning commissions to understand and both model how different behaviors post-COVID-19 are going to impact the use of the system, as well as try to get some real-time feedback from municipalities around what they're seeing in terms of changes in the business dynamic and the mix of tenants in various downtown areas, as well as some of the other commercial and retail space. At the end of the day, we're talking about 4 very transformative changes. First and foremost, telework. Like I said, how that impacts commuting. The other one is education. There was many colleges and universities embracing online education. I think we're all very eager to get school-age children back in the classroom as soon as possible. But it remains to be seen what the lasting impacts are going to be of every single university and college system moving to online models. You think about a city like Boston and the number of higher ed facilities that they have. What is it going to look like in the future in terms of the student population? The other one is telemedicine. I think that's been another positive outcome from the COVID-19 crisis. With so much tragedy and financial impact, we have to acknowledge those few positives that have come out of this situation. And telemedicine, already we're hearing that folks aren't having to go down to Boston for visits to specialists. They're able to maybe go down to see a doctor more infrequently and have follow-up telemedicine visits. So that's going to impact how people travel. And then the last one, of course, is doorstep delivery. Instead of people going out to retail locations, businesses like Amazon and their prevalence are really increasing. So that's changing the use of the system as well. In all situations, we still need a robust highway network, but definitely how that system is being used has changed dramatically during this time, and we know that the future is going to look quite different as well. So it's not going to be easy for us in the state DOT world to understand what all of these lasting impacts are. But near term, as we testified yesterday during our presentation, we have some concerns, especially as we go into the winter months, and these are concerns that are shared by municipalities. We understand the financial situation that we're in, and as the governor has announced, he implemented a hiring freeze so that we could reduce our spending, and that was absolutely necessary. But the challenges we then have are, if we are not successful in keeping our workforce healthy and well, and we end up with any outbreaks of COVID-19 within our workforce, when it comes to winter operations, we could be taxed. And so that's why we're really focused on all of the initiatives that we can do to keep people healthy and well. And that continues to be our primary focus. We have over the years found efficiencies with technology, and our headcount today, our number of funded positions, is much lower than it was previously. And so even a vacancy rate that is lower than prior peaks that we have seen means that we have a smaller workforce, which is why we have to keep them healthy and well. And so we have been working very closely with the Office of Public Health. We've had a winter preparedness task force that has been helping us think about strategies that would allow us to be nimble and even if we have people with mild illness, how do we get them access to testing and screening to understand when it's okay for someone to be in the workplace and when it's not, so that we have as many people available for winter maintenance as possible. And the municipalities have been very eager to hear about our preparations because they too are concerned about the same challenges. For example, if we had an outbreak of COVID-19 in a patrol shed, while we're DOT and we can move trucks and people around, small municipalities maybe only have that one public works shed. So how can they all help each other out? So these are some of the challenges that we have ahead. Hopefully Mother Nature is kind to us and we don't have a severe winter, but of course that remains to be seen. Already other DOTs in other parts of the country have been tested. So we've been working closely with them to understand how they protected their workforce. You know, for example, with the wildfires out in the western part of the country, as well as the very active hurricane season in the southeast. There's been many DOTs who've been trying to balance responding to those events, but also making sure that they kept the employees healthy and well, so they were available for that critical work. And so we're trying to lean on their experiences and make sure that we're doing what we can here. It has been extremely helpful to have public health participate, so that if we're trying to follow the governor's universal guidelines for all businesses as closely as possible. But when you review those guidelines, you'll see there's exceptions for essential workers, given the critical nature of what we do, clearing the roads. We appreciate that latitude, but if we do deviate from the standards that other businesses are following, we want to do that with public health buy-in and feedback so that we are making smart choices. So that's our number one concern is our workforce. And then our second issue is the legislature was very supportive during the last budget. We had been underinvesting in our fleet and equipment for a long time, and that was finally recognized. And the governor and the legislature supported increasing our operating budget so that we could start to replace trucks at the appropriate time, rather than keeping them on the road well beyond their useful life. We were trying to make that case that if we don't replace things on time, we spend a lot of money on repairs and keeping trucks rolling because we need those vehicles to do our critical functions. So we had a significant increase in our operating budget to replace vehicles at the right time. And then in addition, we got support through the capital budget to replace some of our trucks that were on that backlog list. Unfortunately, with the uncertainty around both highway and turnpike revenue, we have had to defer some of the truck replacements that we had planned. In the budget submission that we just presented yesterday, we are going back to the lower levels that were in earlier budgets. And so that still remains a concern for us. As a department, for us to be successful when it comes to operations, we need people and equipment and material. And so I always say that the people are our number one asset, but our trucks and heavy fleet are our number two asset. So that just brings me to the last piece, which is our advocacy with Congress. So as you heard at the last meeting of the Transportation Council, there was provisions in the CARES Act to support both airports and airlines, as well as transit. Unfortunately, there has been no federal assistance for state DOTs for lost highway revenue. So AASHTO is the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials. All the state DOTs are members, and we have been trying to advocate for a backstop for lost state revenue. As I mentioned, early on in the crisis, we thought that the impact was going to be a little greater than what we ended up experiencing. But we're looking at this longer term horizon where there's going to be a reduction in revenues. So currently they're asking for, our state DOTs are asking for $37 billion to replace our lost state revenues. What people don't appreciate is our federal highway dollars can only be spent on preservation, rehab, or renewal. We cannot use federal funding for routine operations and maintenance. And so it's our state dollars that go to those areas. And so while there's been a lot of talk about recovery packages and stimulus, that's typically funding for construction projects. While we very much appreciate that, and we have needs when it comes to increasing the size of our construction programs, we really also need help when it comes to making sure that we have money to do the basics, to plow the roads, to repair our traffic signals, repair guardrail, do all those things that keep people safe. And so that's why the state DOTs have been pushing hard for some kind of assistance in another package. In addition, we are also advocating for $32 billion of additional transit assistance. As you heard last time, there's a lot of needs on the transit side. We're very concerned if there's a reduction in congestion, a lot of the people that become choice riders on transit, because that's a more viable alternative for them, they're going to be more inclined to take their car. And so if there's no congestion and they're commuting by that mode, then the transit agencies, especially in the big metropolitan areas, they're losing revenue from that ridership. And so that means they're forced to make things like service cuts. And for the folks who rely on public transit to get to and from work and to all of the destinations that I described earlier, they would be impacted negatively if they're not going to have the frequency and reliability of service. So that's why as state DOTs we're asking for the assistance for both the lost highway revenue as well as additional assistance for transit agencies because of what we're seeing on the highway system and how that might impact choices and which modes people are using to get around. And so that's been our advocacy over the last several months. And we're optimistic that if something isn't done by the end of the calendar year, when the new Congress and the new administration are in place, that would be a primary focus for them. Otherwise, it's going to be a very difficult budget time for us. Like I said, hopefully Mother Nature will be kind. If we have a mild winter, that does take the pressure off significantly, but we can't count on that. And seeing the frequency of storms and extreme weather in other parts of the country, I don't know how lucky we're going to be here in the Northeast. So hopefully that gave you a sense of what all we've been dealing with here at DOT. I do commend both our own employees as well as all of our stakeholders, the contracting community, the consultant community, all of our modal partners from the transit agencies to our airports. Everyone's been extremely creative. We've had to think on our feet and solve problems in very short order. All of our consulting partners and the regional planning commissions, they have embraced telework as well. And yet we really haven't seen a reduction in productivity. We still advertised all of the projects that we needed to get out by the end of September. And the construction season was a very successful one because we had that dry, hot summer. Not good from the drought perspective, but it was a very productive summer. And so, there's a lot of work that was accomplished that we can be proud of. Unfortunately, this uncertainty around future funding means that the construction industry in particular is concerned about what's ahead. And so the last thing I should have mentioned earlier, we did pass our 10-year plan for transportation in June. The timing was such that even when the legislature was unable to move forward with all of the bills that were still before them, the 10-year plan bill was prioritized and was signed into law by the governor. We did do a couple of things at the midnight hour to try and give the legislature and the governor some flexibility, depending on what transpires in terms of federal assistance. The first thing that we did, by law, 12% of all the revenue we collect, all the state revenue we collect, goes to cities and towns. Should we receive some federal assistance, we may not be able to use that federal funding on the non-federal aid system. And so we added some language allowing the department to go to the fiscal committee and get the authority to increase that percentage from 15% to something higher. The idea being that if we got federal assistance to address our budget shortfalls, then perhaps we could give a little higher percentage to the cities and towns so that we could get closer to the amount of money that was in the budget for distribution. So that was the first language that we introduced. The second item that we included was around the Betterment Program. And so there is a portion of the highway fund revenue, 4 cents that is, or 3 cents that's pledged to Betterment. And then we also have the SB 367 revenue that's going to Betterment type work and our pledged paving work. And so we added some language that if it was absolutely necessary, we would modify the amount going to Betterment to give the legislature and the governor some flexibility to move money into our operating budget to cover any shortfalls. So we did get that language into the 10-year plan so that either if there was no congressional action, we were leaving options on the table rather than having to wait for a bill to be passed before this coming June, as well as should we get federal money, allowing us as much flexibility as possible to spread that wealth, so to speak, and make sure that municipalities were taken care of. So we did get that into the 10-year plan. And so we have some of those options available to us should they be needed. And then the other thing that we've been working on is the FAST Act, the federal authorization ended in September. But we did get a 1-year extension of the FAST Act to provide some predictability for this upcoming year in terms of the size of our construction programs. It's just a 1-year extension, so we're going to be working with the new administration and with the new Congress on a longer term reauthorization bill, but we did get the extension. There's also a lot of concerns while we're seeing reduction in revenue at the state level. Less fuel sales means less federal gas tax receipts as well. And they did infuse general funds into the Highway Trust Fund to make sure that the 1-year extension of the FAST Act would be fully funded. So they put money into the mass transit account to make sure that we're maintaining our transit commitments, as well as putting money into the Highway Trust Fund to fund that 1-year extension. The only downside, we're still in the continuing resolution. So while we will get a year's worth of money eventually, they only gave us a partial allocation through December. So that's the one item that Congress would need to take up as well, so that we can actually spend the money that they've given us. And so I think that gives you a synopsis of everything from the more tactical and operational challenges, as well as the funding picture, and then some of the advocacy New Hampshire DOT and our colleagues across the country have been doing to try and get those needs, especially the financial needs, addressed. So with that, any questions, anyone?
I have a question, Commissioner. This is Representative Sykes.
Please, Representative, go ahead.
Thank you. So it seems to me that one of the concerns that I have, looking big picture long term, is that the effect of COVID on the transportation systems will be short term and long term. And by that, I mean, it might be that the people will stop, traveling as much because of COVID, but the more long-term change might be people stop going to work. They work from home. Do you have any insights about how we might measure that? Because those long-term effects of people not commuting to work, et cetera, are going to have an effect not only on funding, but also on the need for, if you will, space on the highways, for big commuting areas. Like in my community, Lebanon, our daytime population and old figures, it was changing from 13, 14,000 up to 30, 35,000, but we don't know how much of that will remain after the COVID experience is gone by, hopefully sooner rather than later. Anyways, do you have any insights of how that might be measured to separate those two different types of changing transportation patterns?
So the first thing I will say is in the near term, and as you saw from the graph that I displayed, we have counters out on the highway. At our toll plazas, we essentially have real-time information in terms of the use of those facilities. We have an automated counter on 93, and then we have manual counters that we can go out and download data from. So that's how we are able to measure the movement on the system. But that's all reactive. So, we have to start to look at how we're going to model things going forward. And I'll be honest, our traditional transportation models aren't set up for this. And so across the country, many DOTs, as well as larger metropolitan areas, are starting to scratch their head. How do we think about this going forward? I will also say I spoke at the Greater Manchester Chamber of Commerce event this week, and we need communities to be proactive in terms of what they're doing and thinking about in terms of attracting business and economic activity. Some businesses may shrink their footprint in square footage if they don't have as many employees coming into office space concurrently. The flexibility of telework can help your business be more efficient, reduce your overhead if you reduce your footprint in some of the space that you've been using, but then also help you attract talent, right? Because individuals have been looking for flexibility and better work-life balance, and telework certainly supports that. So we're going to have to work very closely with municipalities and with the regional planning commissions to really understand how that change in use is going to impact the need on the transportation system. I say this when I go to talk to lots of chambers. People talk about the need for transportation investment, but I'm always asking them to really think about the type of economic growth they want to see, whether it's retail space, commercial, industrial, biotech, medical. Those all have very different needs when it comes to the transportation system. And so transportation needs to be front and center as we're thinking about both, if you're a private business, where you want to be located and what type of facility you need. But then also communities need to be thinking about where are they going to site services to make sure that they're going to have access to affordable housing, access to services for their population as well. So land use and planning going to change dramatically, and that's where there needs to be a really strong partnership between transportation and those planners who are thinking those things through. And my advice to the folks in the Greater Manchester region was communities need to be proactive. We have a great quality of life in the state. We want to preserve the character, and we've worked hard to have our main streets become vibrant. There's so many examples where communities have been very successful in attracting new businesses and having a mixture of uses that are complementary. So we all need to work together to understand how we don't lose that and can continue to be successful in attracting the type of economic development that is going to be appropriate for a community and, like I said, protect and preserve the economy and the quality of life for the folks who live in that community.
So as a follow-up, that I'm also concerned that it won't be just infrastructure that is affected by these changing dynamics, but also will be affecting how we move people from point A to point B, meaning will the bus companies be as busy as they were before? Will the airlines ever come back from these very serious changing patterns? I don't know. And I just, it's as a community, trying to plan for those types of things, it's really challenging.
I think the one thing that we've learned through COVID-19 though is that we're craving human interaction.
Oh yeah.
I think we're going to survive in this virtual world. People want that mixture. So it's, like I said before, it's what will be the lasting impact. The telework and the flexibility it provides, the opportunities for online learning, those are great things to help people have those opportunities with better work-life balance. But, I can't see us wanting to live that way. Everybody wants to be back in person, and there's tremendous value. You think of as much as we're trying to stay productive working remotely, that diversity of thought, having people around the table, we're losing a little bit of that. And the more time that goes by, we're losing a lot of that. And so it's just understanding what decisions are businesses and companies going to make, as well as what choices are people going to make as we all come out of this. And technology is a wonderful thing, We've talked about, we're about to have a presentation on Transit X. You know, from the transportation perspective, there was these disruptive new modes of transportation on the horizon, but now even our more traditional modes are being disrupted by technology. But this time it's the, you know, the new delivery methods for retail items, as well as now telework and other things exploding in a way that we would never have seen without COVID-19.
And not for nothing, I would like to reemphasize your point that there's planning and other, you know, aspects to this question that communities need to be mindful of. And there's a wonderful presentation. I think it's by Vital Communities. I'm not positive. Nate may know, but it talks about how in future development, what we're trying to do in Lebanon is go up instead of out, because going out costs money in terms of highways, et cetera. And going up gives you a higher tax return for your community because the buildings are worth so much more, and there's a less requirement for the infrastructure that, you know, the more roads. We don't need more roads, kind of thing. So thanks for that insight. I appreciate it.
Are there other questions for Commissioner Sheehan or comments that anyone would like to make? Rad?
Commissioner, I support what Representative Sykes was saying, but more on the near term. Any concerns over the continuing resolution in mid-December and its potential expiration? And is there any discussion going on about that?
We were pleased, you know, the House had passed appropriations bills, but the Senate had not taken up their appropriations bills. Those are now moving, so things are trending in the right direction.
Okay, good.
Anybody who watches the headlines knows that, especially in a lame duck session of Congress, you know, it remains to be seen what will actually happen in the month of December in particular.
Yeah. Thank you.
Is there anyone else? Nate?
Just really a comment and really, I just wanted to just make note and congratulate Commissioner Sheehan on her election as president of AASHTO. We really appreciate the advocacy that you're doing, not only on behalf of New Hampshire, but on behalf of all of the departments of transportation around the country to raise the profile and make sure people at the national level are aware of the impacts of COVID on the transportation industry. And we just really appreciate all the good work that you're doing and how proud we are to have you representing us in New Hampshire at the national level.
Thank you for that, Nate. So for those of you that don't know, last Friday I was elected as the president of AASHTO. I had been serving as the vice president for the last year, which meant that I was chairing their transportation policy forum, which is why I was intimately involved in some of the advocacy with Congress when it comes to funding for all the modes of transportation. Now as president, I get to lead the organization. We passed a new strategic plan during our board meeting. And then as president, I'm also able to pick some emphasis areas. So my first emphasis area is around land use and the value of transportation. And so I know that that'll be an opportunity to advocate strongly for smaller rural states like New Hampshire, as well as the larger, more urban settings. And then my second emphasis area is workforce, both how we can diversify our workforce and make sure that we have the workforce of the future. You're going to, again, hear from Transit X. There's a lot of technology that's coming, and we need both traditional DOT employees as well as more non-traditional. And for a state like New Hampshire, where the demographics of the state are changing, I always say I want my DOT workforce to evolve and reflect the people that we serve. So I think there'll be some opportunities to partner with a number of different associations as we tackle the workforce challenges and try and attract both new talent into the DOT, but also find ways to make sure that we are capturing all of the knowledge from our veteran employees as they leave the workforce. So in addition to all the advocacy for reauthorization and the increase in investment in transportation, those will be two areas where I think we'll be able to bring some attention to the issues that in the Northeast we're facing in particular. I know New Hampshire, Maine, and Vermont, we work closely together. We're facing the same challenges, but you look to our other New England states and even along the East Coast, when we all get together, we're all lamenting the same challenges. And so hopefully we can work collaboratively to bring some solutions.
Is there anyone else? I would just like to add that thank you so much for your presentation and congratulations on your new position, Commissioner. Very well deserved. I wanted to also thank you for pointing out the positive outcomes through COVID, because this is a really challenging time for us, but there have been some positive things that have come out of it, including our ability to communicate right now as we are, and to have people join us with our hearings. I do miss those mileage checks, but anyway. But seriously, I think it's important that you pointed it out, the telework, education online, telemedicine, and the delivery mechanisms. I'm hoping that we can continue to keep the good, keep what is working and what brings more people to be a part of these activities. So thank you very much for your presentation. And next we're going to have Mike Stanley, the CEO and founder of TransitX, talk with us about his projects. Mike, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So why don't we get into it? What I'd like to do is maybe do a 20 minutes of kind of a going through the main flow, and if there's any questions, quick questions while we go through, and then at the end just have a discussion and questions and answers. So we said we've always known urban transportation and suburban and rural transportation is a challenge because we can bring people to the moon, but it's still a challenge to bring people to work. Maybe we should extend this quote to get 20,000 people to work 30 miles away. So in New Hampshire. So the topics I'll kind of go through. You've been presented. You received some of the information ahead of time, including I created a web page for New Hampshire, transitx.com/NH, capital NH, that has proposals that we've done for about 15 to 20 different locations in New Hampshire, along with feasibility studies, as well as a short video. Our feasibility studies go into a lot of detail, and those will be available. As far as the projects that we've tried to get going in New Hampshire, one is at private property on Jericho Mountain for bringing people to the top. They have 5 wind turbines, and the owner of the property, we're now trying to, in the legal mess of LS Power, who owns the turbines, and so we've gotten some blocks there, but hopefully we'll be able to get some development going there. We've also done proposals for what it would look like in New Hampshire. As you probably know, New Hampshire used to have about 1,000 miles of rail across the state. And that was a big economic driver for the state and all of its industries. And now I think you just have much, much less than that. But the notion of having other transportation, a rail-based system. We've also made some proposals for Groveton, and they gave us a letter of interest and saying they were interested in doing a small segment along their Church Street adjacent to Route 3. And they also have some manufacturing space that we're looking at. Right now it's on hold because they haven't been able to create a public meeting because of the COVID, and they didn't have electronic means. And so they're sort of figuring out how they can have a public meeting. So in general, we're tackling the big problems: congestion, safety issues, parking, pollution and health, resiliency, and that nobody has either the space in their cities and towns or the money or the time to do new infrastructure. So it's those are the big issues. The way that people have been trying to approach it, both with electric cars and buses and a charging infrastructure, micromobility and bike sharing, subways for larger metropolitan areas, BRT and others, autonomous shuttles and cars. But all of them have issues. We kind of, everyone loves their private vehicle. You know, that's sort of that's our universal mode right now. Over probably, I would say probably what, 95% of all your trips in New Hampshire are with a personal vehicle. But you also, in higher density cities, you need high capacity. We all want to be more sustainable, and we want sort of to be safe and high speed. And so look at what are the changes in the technology that enable some new approaches to that. And so we have been working on the last 5 years on a micro guideway or a podway. So these are pods that are extremely lightweight. They're weighing 150 pounds empty. They can carry up to a ton of people or goods. They're going along highways. They don't have any stations. They have micro lifts that bring passengers to the ground. So you're basically boarding at grade level. And then you're merging onto the main tracks. So here's one of our prototype pods. And we did a test system. So this is self under its own power. And that was done in 2018. We're making proposals not only for phase 1, but for complete city networks. So if we're looking at New York City, not only would it be on sort of the, you know, crosstown and uptown, but also a sparse road network. The idea is we can replace and the multimodal mess with something that can replace cars, buses, trains, and trucks with things that are vehicles and transportation that's sustainable. We're ready for construction operations. Our implementations will be starting next year in 2021. We have projects starting in Asia, Africa, and the US. Similar systems have been in operation for decades. The Wuppertal Suspension Railway in Germany, Morgantown PRT was automated transit that started close to 50 years ago. There's automated people mover systems. And so generally it's basically a horizontal outdoor elevator. We do proofs of the viability through bankable feasibility studies and using standards and consultants and verified design. So these are some of the projects that we have started. We have about 10 billion in projects that are in the initial of the development phase. We're now looking for the financing for various development funds. We just brought on board a new CEO. And you also see that we have folks from project management, project financing. We have local teams in each of the different locations, and engineering and composite design. So our partners we work with are reputable and experienced and provided the bonded guarantees for all the civil and construction and the transit design. The pods, as I said, are coming down to grade level. They're all handicap accessible. You know, we can talk about the engineering side, but they are capable of handling both bicycles and in Hawaii, they wanted to make sure that it could fit a surfboard. And then there's a bunch of what I call moving to zero. How can we really move towards zero in terms of having zero congestion? Can we have higher capacity than a large highway? Can we make it where you don't wait any more time than, say, an elevator, so even much faster than an on-demand service? Can it be clean and green with no air pollution, no light pollution, no heat island effect from blacktop? Can be powered by all renewable energy and be carbon negative because you're removing carbon from the existing transportation? Can you create an infrastructure that has a 100-year lifespan with composites and with stainless steel exteriors? Can use less materials, can make crashes that you know, a thing of the past where it can be 100,000 times safer than roadways and eliminate all deaths. You know, even roadkill, can we make it equitable so it can be accessible to everyone, whether you have a wheelchair, stroller, bicycle? Can we make it work for rural communities as well as inner city and urban and suburbans go over mountains and tunnels and go where roads can't, for all types of abilities, and whether it's cognitive, audio, visual, communication, motor functions. Zero land use, so we don't need any dedicated space at ground level. There's no parking lots. You can use less pavement. You don't need utility poles. We can incorporate utilities. Because at least in urban cities, a lot of the land is dedicated to transportation mobility. Well, what if we can help recover that land? What about roadways? They're very, and railways are very detrimental to the environment in terms of cutting animal migration paths and other things. That if you could have close to zero environmental impact, no runoff, you can convert your black asphalt to something else other than that. Find your highest and best use. You can use it for energy production or just better aesthetics. We don't have large sky prints, so it's not a giant overhead 10-lane thing. It's a 1 foot wide guideway, and you don't have any parked vehicles. Extreme resiliency, so whether you have ice storms or snowstorms, you don't have plowing. Essentially, it's a covered bridge. It's not a wooden covered bridge. It's not a truss, but it is a covered bridge because your vehicles are running on a protected location. So it can it can be recovered. So even recovering from the worst case. As far as efficiency, it's about at least 10 times, if not more, efficient than electric vehicles. So you're looking at about 2,300 mile per gallon equivalent. And the reason that is because of the lightweight, the aerodynamics. You have hard wheels on steel rails, nonstop travel, and you're at a relatively low speed. We can generate sustainable energy in cities without using land, so we can put both wind and solar generation capacity on the infrastructure. We have no major disruptions during installation. It's kind of like putting in utility poles, so about the same amount of disruption. There's no concrete that is poured. All parts are prefabricated, a fast construction time. We eliminate crime. Most of the crimes, many of the crimes are related to crowds or waiting or loitering or not having having anonymity in your service. So you have a monitored and controlled. When you don't have cars on the ground, well, you don't have vandalism, or you can eliminate most of it. You can have improved access to healthcare because now you can get people to. You don't have hospital deserts. You can get people to where they need to be, and you can make it pandemic proof. We've designed it to prevent the spread of diseases. So you can have a 4-passenger vehicle where there's 4 separate compartments, where you have touchless experience. The doors are automated, so you're not touching the doors. You're not touching any surfaces. You can have automatic contact tracing. You can have automatic sanitation between things with UV lights. You're getting the fastest urban trips. So if you look at the speed of cars versus bikes and taxis and subways and buses, you're looking at a podway is about 4 times faster. So you're looking at 45 miles an hour nonstop. And intercities, so the high-speed podway, that's going at 150 miles an hour nonstop. And when you go 150 miles an hour nonstop, it means, Montreal to Boston is a 2-hour trip. It means that, most places in New Hampshire are less than an hour from, either Montreal or Boston. Faster than a high-speed train. It's lightweight. So lightweight means lower cost. It means lower mass. It means, I can pick up the pod vehicle. It's that, but we can have a decent payload. So you can have, 1,000 passengers, 1,000 pounds for passengers and 2,000 for cargo. No noise, because noise is waste. Well, we're using polyurethane wheels and smooth rails and the aerodynamics that don't have as much air noise and composite structures. And so the podways, and so here's probably one of the biggest things that it's tough to get your head around, but podways cost less than roadways. Our hard costs are about $2 million per kilometer. And it means that we don't need any government subsidies or funding. These can be privately financed and have a return because they're profitable, even with affordable fares. It's actually less expensive to go with this than actually to move to EVs with all the infrastructure that they need. I mean, consider this, is that our pod costs about $7,000. And it's replacing about 30 personal vehicles that will each cost, say, $40,000, $50,000. So you do the economics, do the calculations, and you'll see that this infrastructure, even though it's a new infrastructure, it's actually less costly than any other infrastructure that we need to either maintain or build. Because you look at all the different public costs for road and bridge work and the road related infrastructure and the land value of the space that it takes, and resiliency and all your emergency responses and your plowing and all your negative externalities that are pollution related health costs, and then all your personal costs. I mean, it's about $9,000 per household for car ownership. That's a lot of money. And we're creating many good jobs because there's nothing, you're creating jobs. It's a US company creating a US technology. We're building the manufacturing in the United States. So we're creating good jobs, both direct and indirect, because good transportation leads to good economic development, which creates jobs. And we can do a transition program for transit operators, for taxi and TNC drivers, for truck drivers. It's benefiting the community, the workers, the government, the employers, developers, the environment. You're looking at having it where you can replace and have a much more quiet community with greater privacy, less visual pollution, less obtrusiveness, no more ugly wires that are dangling around and transformers, that you're safe and healthy with no fumes. Your kids can play in the street. Now, I realize people love their cars, right? But the thing is that we're giving people what they love about their cars: their convenience, the independence, the immediacy, the privacy, even the personalization. But without all the issues of cars, the congestion, the cost, the charging, refueling, the maintenance, the pollution. So what we're doing is we're creating a great mode that can replace a multimodal mess. And we can do freight pods to replace trucks. The pods can go anywhere, so up mountains, through mountains. We can go where, in some of the countries is where only the donkeys go, or the gondolas. And it's a universal service, accessible to all with affordable fares, where the fares are similar to existing public transit. And so we're looking at lower risk than the status quo. In fact, it's the lowest risk option. And we need to make these changes. There's no, if the global warming hasn't sort of taken hold, then the pandemic and the COVID should have. That we don't have good solutions now, and they're not getting any better quickly enough. So we can move to zero without government funding. And so the private financing for projects, we have about 200 million that are expected to close in the next 6 months for our projects. We need to develop a manufacturing capacity, because some things we can outsource, but other things we need to develop. The process is a continuous line, roll manufacturing for the guideway, vehicle assembly, lift assembly, a burn and test track, the carbon fiber pultrusion and structural steel fabrication, automated welding and vacuum press molding. We need to create an entirely new Detroit of the 1960s. That's the scale that we're going to be doing. So, but what we need is rights of way, because transportation needs rights of way, and there's no way around that. And that's why we start with those that ask, because we can solve the major issues. We can bring in a source of revenue, because the right to way owners, which is usually the municipality, they're receiving 5% of gross revenue. We have a formula for creating equitable fares, even as it becomes a very high mode share. And we're not asking the government to take any financial risk, no project risk, no technical risk, no political risk. We can do it before the next election. We can have people start, traveling in pods. Kids can go to school in pods. You can resolve this whole issue of recycling your bus system between elementary and middle school and high school, and you can have all the kids start at a reasonable hour. And end at a reasonable hour. You can do after school programs and before school programs. You just eliminate the issues of the school bus system. So we can talk about the development phase and the implementation phase. This isn't just about transportation though, because as you know, transportation involves a lot of things. I mean, we're talking about clean energy. We're talking about better ways of dealing with education, healthcare, food security, poverty, homelessness, as well as all the roads diseases. We're proposing a U.S. interstate podway. So this would be a 36,000-mile high-speed podway with 200,000 pods going 150 miles an hour nonstop, 10,000 stops that are serving 80% of the population within 15 minutes. Be privately financed, $250 billion. The construction duration would be about 10 years. And it requires the rights of way would be a single executive order that enables easements along highways for sustainable micro guideways. And that, when you look at high-speed rail, doesn't make a lot of sense from many different aspects, but high-speed podways, yes. From the speed and the convenience and the funding and the rights of way and the environmental and the disruption, the land use and the safety and the jobs and the freight, you want high-speed podways. If you can go 2 hours from, Montreal to Boston and you have, 150 stops between it that can go to every single major destination in New Hampshire. You can take your large highways and do something else with them. You can use them for energy production, for food production. And we have, and as I mentioned, a new CEO. So, so let me stop and thank you and be able to take any questions.
Can I ask a question?
Yes. Connie?
Yeah. Hi. So I have two questions. One is capacity, because your spacing of pods is regulated by safety, and you need certain distance between pods. You're introducing pods midstream, so especially if you're talking about traveling 50 miles an hour or 200 some miles an hour. Safety regulates that those pods be minutes apart from each other. So I'm wondering, how do you get the capacity when you're putting 4 people in a pod or maybe 1 person in a pod, because who needs that exact route? And I don't think you said somewhere that you have the same capacity as a subway system. I don't see it. I'm wondering how you see that.
Yeah, so let's take a look at that, because you can, so the capacity, one is you can have 1 second headways, and just like on the highway system, you have human-driven vehicles that often have less than a 1 second headway, and so you can certainly have so with a headway of 1 second and 4 people per pod, or 4 seats per pod, and you can have 3 pods in a train. So you're talking about up to 6 pods per second, each with 4 seats. So you're talking about 43,000 seats per hour.
Are you using transportation planners? Because 1 second headway, I don't see that. The pod has to accelerate to mix in with traffic, which means you need a minute in front and a minute behind it as it. So I'm not seeing that. I mean, you need some modelers to take a look at that, and
we have done modeling, and
the second related question is: have you gone through a federal process for safety certification? And that typically takes about 5.
There's
I'm sorry?
Well, one is that's why we're doing a lot of this stuff overseas, because they have different regulations overseas. Second is that we have engaged with folks, and you can do an accelerator. So for example, the Morgantown PRT system, that was from scratch to an operational system within 2.5 years. Mm-hmm. So let's put it this way. If you are introducing a system that's 100,000 times safer, that what we're saying is we can prove that you're 100 times safer, there should be allowing that to occur. And so you can get exceptions for that. And there is existing standards for the automated people mover standards. And they have just recently introduced it where you don't have the brick wall, you have a very short headways that you can show that the control system allows short headways and merging in, similar to think of it as like a highway. A highway doesn't have 2 second headways. You can see the video of there. That's a highway system, and you have manually driven vehicles where people are sometimes with a half second or a quarter second headway. And so the safety of that compared to an automated system is dramatically different.
Carol?
Yeah, thank you for taking my question. Your plan depends on right-of-way access and if I recall, a 5% revenue share with government. Now, in the case of a federal outlay of your system, you would rely on an executive order. But as for a local system, municipalities control the right of way, and the right of ways have been problematic for many with telecommunications issues, so people don't get along to begin with. I'm not sure, is there legislation you would need to pass in New Hampshire that would allow municipalities to trade right away for a revenue? I mean, I don't.
There is, because you have existing utilities that are operating in the state that are
Right.
using existing rights of way. You have private companies using your rights of way. So essentially, this would be a public utility. And as with a public utility, you have some regulations on that as well as limits on that. So we should be able to make it where you can pull a permit to be able to do this. So the municipalities, as you say, they do control. Now in New Hampshire, it's most municipalities, they're state routes that are going straight through. And so we would have to work with the state and be able to at least have some exceptions for crossing or going along, depending upon the rights of way for any particular one. Like in Groveton, Route 3 is the entire, basically the entire municipality, is the entire village. So there's only a short segment that they actually had control of on Church Street. But we were making it where we could go along public property and then private property, and then just go across Route 3, where once we got the regulations, we would just put up a single beam that would connect the left side to the right side. So.
Follow up with that?
Yes, Carol, follow
Yeah,
up.
well, it's my understanding that even though you're on the state right of way, the municipality is the beneficiary of whatever deal is struck. And I just don't think that that New Hampshire has, the municipalities have a lateral right to give a right of way away for a promise of a share of revenue. Don't know. So just bringing that to the forefront.
Okay, we have a couple hands up, and I want to go to the commissioner first because you may be able to answer this question, and then to Jim Jalber. You don't mind.
So I am concerned about what legislation would be necessary to use the right of way for this purpose. Most of our state corridors, we've invested federal funding, and there's a lot of regulations around charging fair market value for use of that real estate. And then likewise, even when we've had the conversation about installing electric charging, any revenue that's generated, that's typically prohibited. You're not allowed to have commercial activity occurring on federally funded real estate. So that's why we haven't been able to commercialize our rest areas as an example, because we purchased those rest areas with federal funds and we therefore can't have commercial activity. So I think that land use issue does need to be looked at more closely because the federal regulations in particular are clear around how we can use land that was either purchased with federal funds or where we've funded improvements with federal dollars.
What's nice about federal is that with one executive order, both in Obama and it was also signed by the Trump administration for doing a rural broadband. So that was bringing rural broadband, and that was saying, we're opening up essentially the rights of way for along the highways for rural broadband. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of complexities to that, but this is one of the reasons why I think the United States is falling behind other nations, and we need to make a decision whether we hide behind the regulatory framework that is protecting us, even though it kills us. And so that's the reason why we're going overseas first, is because the regulatory environment is crippling in the United States. And that's just that's a policy decision that New Hampshire, that Massachusetts, that each state and each federal. Are we in an emergency? Do we need to make changes? Or are we going to be sufficient with basically killing off the environment and having an inhabitable planet? We have to make that call. It's a tough one. So make the call, because are we in trouble or are we not? And if we are in trouble, then we need to make those hard decisions and not wait and have it drag out for 5 or 10 years when we're going to have a planet that's going to be uninhabitable, or the costs associated with the equivalent, the flooding and the winds and the rains are going to make it where it's economically not viable, and you're going to have a huge issue. You're going to have big issues.
Thank you, Mike. Jim Jalbert.
Yeah, first of all, I think we could debate climate change all day. So I think that, that needs to be parked aside, and then we have to look at the reality of this thing. And so, a couple of thoughts in terms of right-of-way use. There are many bus companies across the country, and myself included, who've been in business and encouraged bus rights of way and the breakdown lane and looking at alternatives to speed up transit and make it more viable than the private passenger automobile. And because of federal regulations, it stood in the way. And so, I think that sits there as a number one thing. Number two, I would be very surprised if a municipality or a state or this country would sole source to one mode, because they typically don't do that. It would go to a competitive environment. Number three, I understand what you're saying about job conversion, but based upon your model, and I've looked into your model, there's not enough jobs to be converted from your system to from conventional trucking and busing. And the problem you have with that is the Teamsters and the ATU are going to have a field day with it. And then number four, in terms of high speed over between Canada and New Hampshire, the Canadian transportation is even though they went to open competition in Ontario, they won't do it in Quebec province. And so you would have to get operating authority in Canada to run between the United States and Canada, and they haven't released that in 35 years. And people continually try to do it. And finally, on an interstate system from California to the East Coast, you would run into a problem of the airline lobby, the airlines themselves, who employ a whole lot of people, and the rail
Much
lobby.
less now.
And well, much less now, but that happened in 08 and it changed again. And I think it's a cool idea, but I have to be honest with you. I have a place up in Mid-Coast, Maine, in the town of Port Clyde, and they tried to put a wind farm out there, and Port Clyde got together and they nailed it. And you go into a town like Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Now, maybe Portsmouth would love it. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. But if you go into a town like Portsmouth and you go run a pod system up and down some of those streets, the taxpayers who pay to live in that town may have a problem. And finally, and the biggest thing is, I know it's privately funded, but there's a thing called fares. And if you get municipalities and the state involved and the government involved, they're not going to give you a free license to charge fares and have a sole source. They just won't do it. Even if
fares are regulated based on a formula, so they're out of our control.
Well, they may be out of your control, but to sit there and think that one mode, one provider is going to get access, a town's going to do it, and they're going to let you have free, even if you have a fare formula. What if the fare formula doesn't recapitalize your investment or pay for operating expenses? I mean, here's the downside for you. The downside for you with me is I've been doing this for about 40 years. And I've dealt with the federal stuff, and I just don't want to go on, but you've got some mountains to climb, which are really difficult, and an executive order won't happen in this case. It just won't happen.
Yeah.
So
and that's why we do it.
You got to be a realist about it.
Well, that's why we go overseas, is because you don't have the same regulatory frameworks, and you can actually make progress. So, what I guess what my ask is that, look, the first state that does allow me to allow us to use the rights of way, I relocate our main center of manufacturing and I relocate our headquarters to that state. So that's we'll create an entirely new $1 trillion industry and make that state the #1 but we need access to the rights of way.
So Mike, you had mentioned that you have a project in Groveton and also Georgia. Is that correct?
Yes.
Could you tell us a
Yes.
little bit more about how they got to be adopted? How extensive are they?
So the one in Groveton is very small. It's actually part of a proposal for doing a manufacturing, because they just cleaned up a manufacturing area in the center of Groveton. And so that would be a combination where essentially it would be our test track and manufacturing. But it would be dependent upon us getting municipal rights of way, a binding rights of way agreement from the Northumberland. So that's still on. So they signed a letter of intent that they wanted to have a long-term concession agreement for rights of way. But the next step would be a public meeting where the public can come and make comment, and that may work or may not work. The one in Africa is on a private, so there's a 400-acre new theme park. And so we've been talking to the private landowners about, and they want to use this as opposed to having giant parking lots and having, so they want to have a direct access to the airport. We actually have 4 letters of intent from counties in Georgia. So we're talking about and cities. So there's basically all the municipalities around the airport have signed at least letters of interest that say they want to explore this. So we're trying to close on the funding to then start the next step in actual design of those systems.
Thank you. I just wanted to add that one of the cool things that I've experienced being a part of this council is the new technology. I mean, autonomous cars, flying cars, podways. I remember watching Star Trek, and people are, Captain Kirk is talking into his communicator, and now we all have communicators. So I just applaud you. All of these different ideas, they take time. There are hurdles to overcome. But what I'm looking at, I could see us in 20 years, 30 years, that we will, have that as well as autonomous cars. But I thank you for your presentation. And does anyone else have any, Brad?
Mike, I'm struggling with how to understand the user experience where I come out of someplace midline and I want to catch a pod. Where does that pod come from? Is it sitting somewhere nearby and I walk to that?
There's small sidings. So let's say you have a stop every, say, block. And so you'll walk to your nearest pod stop. The pods are on sidings, kind of like, think of like on-street parking, but for pods.
Okay.
And so as you approach the stop, you'll hand wave with a eye contact and a wave of the hand, and that initiates the pod to then go down. So by the time you arrive at the stop, the pod is there waiting for you. You may have already told it its destination, so then you just getting in the pod, and then it takes you up, merge, and then go to your destination. There may be 1 or 2 stops where if you do have a stop, it's adding about 30 seconds to the overall travel time.
And if I'm technology averse, how do I use the system?
I didn't say any technology that you're using. I said
okay.
If you have to have a hand and an eye, or you can use a phone, or you can use the kiosk. I mean, there's many different ways of using it. You don't have to use any particular technology. You can just use hand signals in your voice. You could say, take me to 12 Main Street.
Okay. I thought in the presentation I'd seen something about like registered users or something like that.
Well, so we know that, so if you get on board and then you cause damage or something else, that, we know at least with this case, there will either be authentication, like an Uber app, or facial recognition or gesture recognition. There's many different ways of authenticating, depending upon the municipality and the laws of the country.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments, Commissioner?
So my question is around the fee structure. So you said that the cost for the user is sort of equivalent to riding public transportation or ride share. But are there different price models depending on the distance that you're traveling? Or is it the same
There is.
per mile, so to speak?
There's, well, simple, it's basically $1 per mile. So it's, so you're looking at about, in New Hampshire, it's based on median income. And so if the median income, I don't know, is like 50,000, 55,000, then you're looking at about 30 cents per, about 46 cents per mile. There is volume discounts. So if like the municipality wants to buy and enter into a contract for 3 years for providing transportation services for schools, then they'd have a lower rate. So there's volume discounts, there's distance discounts. What we don't encourage, or we don't, is that we wouldn't offer directly any sort of like monthly pass. We think that it should not be like a all you can eat type, that you should be basically paying on a value basis. And so all of our things are based on a formula. So for example, like overseas, like in Nigeria, where the median income is say $1,500 a year per family, you're looking at rates where it's about 7 cents per kilometer. If you're looking at New York City, where you might have $90,000 a year, then you're looking at more like 55 cents per mile. So it's based on median income. It's based on the median income of the area in which you're coming from. So you're coming from a poor area as your home stop, then it's less than if you're coming from so it's based on the median income of the community in which you're living in.
Jim, you had a question?
Yeah, just 2 follow-ups. Have you had any discussions with NHTSA about this?
Let's see, is that the Transportation, the Safety Administration?
National High, yes. Because NHTSA would have to really approve these pods.
Actually, it doesn't. It goes under FTA because it's a transit system, so it goes under the FTA.
No, that's not true. Even FTA buses have to be approved by NHTSA. That's absolutely not true. The second thing is, you said you wouldn't offer a discounted ticket. But you also gave long distance examples. What about people who commute to Boston? Because what you're talking about, using your 46 cents to meet that commuter rate, you'd be down under 15 cents a seat mile or a passenger mile. So how does that work?
That's why I say it's based on, because it's based on the distance traveled. So if you're going a longer distance, then it's a less rate per distance. So
you would discount your rate by 75%?
No, it's basically a minimal to like the commuter rail. So for example, I went on the commuter rail and it was like $12 and I went, I don't know, 25 miles. So we're going to be more expensive than buses, but we're going to be less expensive than rail. But it's going to be faster than a bus. So there will be sort of, but we're not trying to achieve necessarily there's some optimal bus routes that are doing a low per seat. So we may not even be able to compete with that other than the time difference.
So, but you would still want to travel on those routes for leisure type and non-commute related traffic?
Well, we're looking at our goal is to have mode share that are similar to personal vehicles, which are now, I don't know, 85, 90% mode share. So
the reason I asked that is many bus routes that are privately owned depend upon those routes, not only for peak commuter times, but also for leisure traffic. And they use an offset from those leisure riders to pay for the losses and or to break even in peak commuter times. So you'd have to be cognizant of that, because what you'd be doing is you could potentially destroy existing services while not answering the need during peak congestion periods.
Possibly. I mean, there's different ways that we can, there's like per stop pricing. So for airports and other things. So there will be disruption, and hopefully we can work to sort of smooth that out. So the bus operators may operate pod networks, because we have to have operational companies that are going to be servicing the vehicles. So, you know, there will be a transition, because we're not looking to necessarily, you know, you don't need another mode. What you need is you need less modes. You need a great mode that people can just always use. And, you know, think of it this way. Imagine that you had a Uber that was waiting for you on every block that was 7 times cheaper and 3 times faster than Uber. How many people then would be using an Uber service if that was the case? If it was basically the same as mass transit, but it was instantaneously available all the time, 24 hours a day, and almost gave you the more convenience than your personal vehicle. You're going to have
and that's great. That's great. But all I would suggest to you is I can ask a question and get a positive response to anything. But when the rubber meets the road and you talk about cost and impact and challenges relating to labor, it's a different environment. And no, maybe over in Europe, which I don't believe, but maybe over in Europe, they're not dealing with these types of issues. In fact, I know they are, because they do. I have counterparts in Europe that have the same problems we do in the States. I'm not.
Europe.
I want to be very. I want to be very clear. I'm not suggesting it's not a cool idea. I agree with the senator that someday we may have a situation like this. But you know, I learned a long time ago that you never look at the world through rose-colored glasses. And all I'm suggesting to you is the challenges are significant and impactful to many people as a result of it, in a positive and negative way. And I think you have to take a cold, hard look at that.
Yeah, no, we have, and we will. We will continue to do that. So, and that's exactly why we have a strategy of not going into necessarily focusing on the U.S. first, because, as what you say, it's a regulatory nightmare.
Director Galecki?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mike, thank you for your presentation. Definitely an interesting idea. I do think that in New Hampshire here, we are positioned in a way that you really get to try your concept in different type of geographic as well as other ways, because we've got the urban areas, and we also have the areas that are a little bit less less dense as well. So it gives you an idea, or it gives you an opportunity to try it in different surroundings as well. I do have a lot of questions though, and I'm not going to touch upon all of them. I know you mentioned that this mode of transportation would eliminate the need for parking, but it also is based on a specific infrastructure. So I would assume that, you know, if I live in an urban area, I would need to get into my vehicle to drive somewhere to a stop or where I can access this infrastructure. So I would have to park my vehicle. You're saying no?
No, that's why we have a sparse road network. So you're looking at a stop on every block. And so if you only have to walk a half a block to get to a stop, you're not going to be driving a half block. You're going to be walking it.
You're talking about a city type of environment though.
A city type of environment, or even rural, as long as you're going between because a lot of your rural communities are based along a major route. So that major route is going between cities. So you're able to provide services, and our stop costs less than a 2-car garage. So when you're looking at infrastructure costs, you know, ours are less than just building in, you know, garages.
Right, but I mean, in order to cover a specific area, I don't think you would be able to eliminate completely the need for people to get to a stop for your pod as well. There would still be a need.
That is what we're doing. We're eliminating the last mile. We're providing it. You know, if you have a stop every block, you don't need a car.
Okay. It's going to take some time to get to that type of infrastructure where you have a stop accessible within walking distance to everyone. So
that's why our factories will be creating about 300 kilometers per year, and we'll have multiple factories. So our goal is to produce about 10,000 kilometers of track per year within the next couple of years. So very massive infrastructure of cranking it out and being able to install it very quickly.
Okay, a follow-up, Madam Chair?
Follow-up, yes.
My next question is regulatory structure as well, because it seems like you're describing a privately owned organization that would be funded by fairs with a lot of capital investment upfront. What type of regulation or oversight, governmental oversight, would you be seeing? Specifically, I'm more interested in safety regulations as well.
Yeah, so maybe so I've talked to a lot of people at the DOT, and to the FRA and FWHA and the FTA. They actually started a new group that was looking at alternative transportation modes that is trying to be sort of a clearinghouse for dealing with the regulatory issues of new modes, like Hyperloop, I think was going under that as well. From everyone that I've been speaking to, it does seem like FTA has the authority to regulate that. Now, whether they're using other things like NHTSA and others, but the FTA does have at a state level the regulatory authority to govern transit systems, and so this falls as close to FTA as anything else that we've seen. But then again, in government, because this is not rail, it's not road, it's not anything, a lot of it is like nobody knows what to do with us. It's like, great, well, then we'll be going overseas because you guys can't figure out, so we'll keep on pushing because it needs to get done in the United States. We have even more issues, but so we think it's FTA until somebody tells us otherwise.
Madam Chair?
I'm sorry, Director, are you all set?
I can wait for a follow-up in a bit.
Well, I just wanted to ask a follow-up to that. So I appreciate that from your perspective, the final service delivery model is probably most similar to FTA. But you're talking about using real estate that's been purchased with federal highway funding. There is a safety concern. All the modes have to have interactions with NHTSA. So I really do think, as with many of our transportation projects that are multimodal, we have to go through a permitting and a regulatory process with each of those different entities. And I don't see this being any different. I don't think the fact you've got to work with more than one entity is a barrier in the long term if this was something that was going to be embraced. But the reality is you're going to have to work with all of the different modal administrators at US DOT. And like I said, because states rely heavily on federal funding, it's not just about state regulations and state laws. A lot of the real estate you're trying to use was purchased and has seen investment from federal sources. So it's got to be every.
And that's why we're also
DOT.
And that's why we're also focusing on municipalities where we don't have to deal with state and federal, and so we don't have those limitations if we're working purely on municipal land.
I could see you having success if we're talking about closed campuses or true local roadways, or those segments of the federal aid system, so that you could really demonstrate the potential for your solution, while you in parallel would work on the regulatory side with all these other entities that we're discussing today.
Correct. And that's one of the reasons why working on private property as well, so that way you don't have as many, you can, get tickets that people have signed a waiver agreement that doesn't, impact that. So yeah, there's, we have talked to even the tramway where they do in New Hampshire, the regulatory, as you know, for the ski lifts and others. And they wrote me a letter, said, this isn't us, even though it says that we're into, recreationals, like, no, we disavow sort of that we don't need to work. You don't need to go through us. So we start down that process and we try to find out, who, what are the right agencies. And, you could say that it's covered by no one. You can say it's covered by everyone. And there's some balance somewhere in there that makes sense. So I
think it's important to have all this feedback that they're offering. This is good information for your company. So the director and Nate also had something as well.
Yeah, very, very quickly, Madam Chair. Mike, interesting concept, definitely. And I know that you seem discouraged a bit about potentially having to deal with or work through some of the red tape. I would encourage you to not give up. I think that New Hampshire has shown that there are ways to work through different different issues as well. And I think what Commissioner said, and I saw a lot of head nodding as well. Start small, look at a small controlled project, a pilot project. I know Senator LeVay can attest to the fact that we've introduced some legislation in the past where we've allowed for study committees or study commissions to study a small project or a pilot where you can work through some of those issues by inviting stakeholders and kind of putting some of those concerns or obstacles on the table and working with the appropriate people on a small scale to really define a pilot program that works. So I think maybe that would be a different approach as opposed to going in and looking for general regulation that would give you a more open permission or authorization to operate, looking at the small scale, like you said, working with a closed project on a municipal level, working through some of the regulatory issues or other issues that you would need to work through. So.
And that's exactly why Northumberland, that's why we were working Northumberland, is because they have a very small 200-meter section of road. So that's exactly what we can do. One of the challenges is project financing. A small project is 100 million, and at 5 million a mile, it means it's 25 kilometers, 25 kilometer system. So the whole thing is it has to be scale. And so, we'll either do that somewhere else or here, but it has to be at scale because you can't, there's nobody to finance a pilot system because pilot systems don't make money because you don't have network effects. So you can't, I don't have the money to do a small system. I have money to do large systems. So.
Okay, Nate, did you have a comment or question?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just say that the idea of personal rapid transit has been around for a long time. I think the most famous example is the Morgantown, West Virginia system, and that's been around for maybe 40 years or so. I think there's a system at Heathrow Airport in London now, maybe. So the ones that have actually made it to construction are, like Commissioner Sheehan was saying, in a college town or a smaller kind of dense airport environment where it's not a large scale type of situation. A lot of large scale, I think, PRT systems have been proposed over time. I think California has had a couple of proposals at the scale you're talking about. They haven't went anywhere because of all of the regulatory and the considerations that we've been talking about, as well as the sheer scale of building a fixed guideway system to that extent. What makes, I guess, how is your mousetrap better than what has been proposed for a number of years in the past, and how is it that you could do this at a level of scale that nobody else has ever been able to accomplish in the United States or maybe around the world?
So this slide is for you. So why no large pod networks? And it comes down to these 6 criteria. One is that cost. Those systems had much heavier vehicles, and your infrastructure was more costly. So if you're looking at $10 or $12 million per mile, that you have a higher cost of your infrastructure, it may not be profitable to be able to be financeable. The capacity was insufficient. So if you can't replace mass transit, then you're only looking at last mile kind of distribution networks, and it's not financeable. So you have to have the capacity to be able to replace mass transit, and the other systems don't have the capacity. They're like maybe cap out at maybe 10,000 or 5,000 passengers per hour. The convenience is the stations are far apart. So they don't have inexpensive stations. Their stations are huge, which goes to the fit, that the big stations don't easily fit within cities. So you have rights of way issues. And then they don't do any freight. So you're looking at passenger only solutions. So you have multiple modes, both freight and passengers. And so you can't get financing. So they require government financing, which you're never going to get because it's a new mode is competing with the bucket of money that everyone's trying to go after. So it's the 3 C's and the 3 F's, and that's why we don't have large pod networks.
Heidi?
So Mike, I have a question. Do you have a video simulation that we could see that would help us better understand maybe some of Brad's question and some of the others as to how the pods get on and off the primary track and how others slow and timing and those kinds of details?
Sure we do, but I don't, yes, we have hundreds of different, examples. I'm not sure. I mean, think of a highway system. I mean, you're basically scaling down a highway system. So think about how your highway system works. You have, off ramps, you have on ramps, you have, junctions, you have, and there's different variations based on the capacity. So sometimes they're crossing junctions, sometimes they're flyovers. Think of like all the different ways that you can have junctions on a highway. There's, cloverleaf, there's diamonds, there's, 50 different variations of that. I will say our minimum turning radius is 3 meters or 3 yards. So it's a very, you can have very small networks and have turnarounds. And your vehicle length is only 2 yards long. So
are you able to send any of those links to maybe help some of us engineers better visualize how everything comes together?
Yeah, you can go and download. There's a feasibility study. I think I sent a link for that, but the feasibility study goes into a lot of the details. And so if you're looking for
like a video simulation kind of thing there, that
what's the design spec? It's a design manual, or I wouldn't say it's not the design manual. It's subsets of the design manual that show it, the different configurations of and there's lots, right? I mean, there's dozens of different variations. So you're not going to see, there's not one, magical thing that says, okay, this is the way that you're using it everywhere. It's like a, highway and road system. There's lots of variations based on your capacity, based on the fit. But essentially you have, there's only there's merging and diverging. So you have, you have merges and you have, curves and you have straights and you have, super elevation for doing bank turns like a highway. So it's take your railroad design manual and just scale it down by, now it's a narrow gauge that's 1 foot rather than 4 foot 7 and whatever, or 8.5 inches or whatever. So it's just a much smaller gauge railroad system.
Are there other questions or comments?
Senator, I would make one comment.
Yeah.
I'd like to go back, Mr. Stanley, just to point out and to reemphasize something that Director Bilecki said. And that is that there is a sense here in New Hampshire that we can be entrepreneurial and open to new ideas. And I'm going to give you a very concrete example of that happened this last legislative season. And that is that New Hampshire was the first state to approve the use of roadable aircraft in the state. No one else has gotten there yet, but we have. And so I think, and I know that people have questions about it and they are worried about it and so on. But when you look at it, it's an innovative last mile solution for air travel. And so, and admittedly, it's a very small scale and only be applied to very wealthy people. But the point I'm making is that we looked at something that was very different and innovative, and we made that happen here in this state. So just, be mindful of that.
Okay. I mean, what I'd ask for is that, I think that the governor would certainly understand what we're doing, because it's about American technology, American jobs, bringing economic development to, both the North Country and in southern New Hampshire. So, there's a lot at stake here, right? If you're looking at trying to attract like the HQ2 from Amazon and the amount of that would be impactful, you're looking at something that is much more impactful than you're, spending millions of dollars trying to, get Amazon to come to New Hampshire. So this is, it's pretty simple. It's like rights of way are the key issues. You make rights of way available, then I come and set up business and make, New Hampshire the #1 state for the podway industry.
Are there any other questions or comments that anyone on the council has? Nope. Seeing none, Mike, I want to thank you so much for your presentation, and we will certainly be watching Podways as it evolves. And
Okay.
as Representative Sykes said, Having a study committee is a great way to dig into what the issues are and also to gain more acceptance for your projects. So it's something that you may want to consider. Thank
Great,
you
thank
very
you.
much for being here.
Thank you.
Okay, next on our agenda, we have our next council meeting. And I believe that it may be best to hold off on scheduling a meeting. We will be getting a new chair, as I did not get reelected, so I will not be the chair. And as I understand it, every 2 years, the new chairs are elected. So I'm looking for some agreement there. Do you think we should hold off on setting a date until we get the new folks appointed? And I see no objection to that. So I think that's what we will do. And as far as any other business, does anyone else have other business? Okay, seeing nobody with other
Madam Chair.
business.
Madam
Yes.
Chair,
Director.
I do want to thank you for all the work that you have done. I think you've been a wonderful leader to this council. I know that you really kept us going in the right direction. You've shown really openness to listen to any issues and invite different stakeholders. And I really enjoyed my participation under your leadership. So thank you for all of your efforts on the council.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. I have to say that it's mutual. I never thought I would be on the Transportation Council, but I have learned so much. I've had the honor to serve with all of you who are experts in transportation. And I especially want to thank the Commissioner for your leadership because our agendas were largely formatted and even covered by you. So I appreciate that. And having the director here as well, having transportation well represented. I want to thank Representative Sykes, for my fellow legislator who has a great passion for transportation. And I hope that you will be on the next commission as well, the next group. I also want to thank Mike Tardif for taking such amazing minutes. So descriptive. Thank you so much. You did a super job. And I want to thank Alan Raff, our Senate admin, for helping to manage these meetings so well. And Kathleen Mulcahy, thank you very much for your support. And also to Ava Hawks, who is my aide and who did an amazing job communicating with everyone. So, you know, in closing, I just want to once again say it's been a pleasure to work with everyone. I have a new love, which is flying cars and podways and autonomous vehicles. And you guys gave me that, so I appreciate it. And I'll be following you in the future. So thank you again. And everybody have a wonderful, safe holiday. And if you ever need me, you know where to find me. Just Google me, I'll be there. All right?
Thank you,
Thank
Senator.
you, Senator.
Thank
Be
you,
well.
Senator.
Take care, everyone. Bye.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you
Happy
very much.
Thanksgiving.
Holidays.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Happy and safe.